Now that you're renting an apartment, but maybe you're thinking about buying a house. So because me and my wife used to rent before and now obviously we own a house, in this video I'm gonna try to clarify which option is actually better for you. Now keep in mind this is just a general information whether you should buy a house or not, and not specifically related to the prices right now. I'm talking about April 2024. So the purpose of this video is just to give you general idea, and also I'm not a financial advisor, I just simply share things from my experience, so take what I'm about to share with grain of salt. I think we should start from pros and cons of each. So here are the reasons to rent the apartment or pros. Number one, it's very easy to rent the apartment, there is pretty much no money down. I mean, there might be 1 or 2 months security deposit, but at least you don't have to put major money down compared to, for example, buying a house. Number two, when you're renting the apartment, you're pretty much not responsible for any repairs or even maintenance for that matter. So if anything breaks, for example, unless you physically damage something on purpose pretty much, then the landlord or the building personnel will fix it for you. So there will be zero costs coming out of your pocket. Number three, it's gonna be very easy to move to another apartment or even change the location actually, because you're not really tied down to that apartment, and even if you signed the lease before for a longer period of time and you're trying to move out earlier, most landlords won't have any problem with it. That's because they can charge the new person renting the apartment way higher price, so most likely moving out early won't be an issue. And number four, renting an apartment is usually cheaper when you compare it to paying the house mortgage, so you can at least technically save some money, although I'm gonna come back to this topic in a second. So these were the pros, but now let's talk about the cons of renting the apartment. The first one is the rent always goes up. So for example, when your 2 or 3 year lease is finished, the landlord can increase the price again, especially if he did some repairs to the building or your apartment, of course. And since generally the house prices go up, and let's say you're trying to move to some other location, most likely this rent will be more expensive again. Now sure, some costs for homeowners can increase too, like the property tax for example, or the house insurance. However, these increases are way slower, so you won't feel that much impact every 2 or 3 years. 3. You can literally lose the apartment at any time. Obviously, when your lease term is finished, let's say after 3 years, and that's because for at least most places in US, the landlord literally doesn't have any obligation to renew your lease. The con number 4 is there is absolutely no tax deductions when you're renting, so you can't deduct any part of the renting cost because only the landlord can deduct any cost for any repairs obviously, plus in some cases the interest rate and property taxes, and you as a renter cannot do that. And another huge con of renting is that all the money that you spend for the rent will go towards nothing pretty much, because obviously you will never own that apartment, you're just renting it, so that's pretty much wasting the money compared to, for example, buying a house where your mortgage payments actually go towards paying off the house. And con number 5, which for some of you might be important too, and that is that you can't really make any changes to the apartment without notifying the landlord first, especially if these are major changes. So now that I showed you pros and cons on renting, let's jump to the pros and cons of buying a house before I'm gonna give you my final recommendation. The first big reason to consider buying a house is that by simply paying your monthly mortgage, you're actually building the equity in the house. So not only after a few years you can unlock some home equity loan, but also since you pay some of the mortgage off, you can then decide to sell the house and cash the difference between what you actually owe on the house still and the price you're gonna sell the house for, so that will definitely give you some nice financial advantage, especially in the long run when you compare it to renting. Another really good reason to own the house is because even though you still owe the money to the bank for the mortgage of course, however you can make pretty much any changes to the house, especially on the interior and even exterior. Now with that being said, just hold on a second, that only applies if your house is totally independent and doesn't belong to some crazy homeowners association, because if it does, then they can dictate the rules too, so your changes at least to the exterior of the house might be limited. And that's why when we bought our house I made sure that it actually doesn't belong to any homeowners association, because sometimes they can literally mess up your life. The third pro of buying a house is that for most places in United States you can deduct nice amount of taxes from your gross income simply because you owe the house. So for example, you can deduct the entire interest you pay for the mortgage, and that's significant amount of money, because if I remember remember correctly, our first year of mortgage, we deducted about $28,000 from the total revenue. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you're gonna get $28,000 refund. It just means that you can deduct this money from the gross income. So in this example, if you make $100,000 a year and deduct the $28,000, you will pretty much pay the taxes from the $72,000 instead of the entire 100. So that's a huge advantage. And at least in the place I live in, which is New York, you can also deduct the property taxes. Now, reason number 4 to buy a house is that usually with a house you have more room. So you may have some extra basement, backyard, or even garage in some cases, which a lot of apartments, especially in some busy metropolitan areas, simply don't have. And the 5th, and this is really good financial reason, is that houses always go up in value, so this could be actually a good investment. And yes, when you look at last 24 months, for example, it kind of fluctuates. However, when you look at the long term, like 20 or 30 years, as you probably already know, the house prices seems to always go up. Now, these are definitely good pros to own the house. However, there is actually few cons too. The first one is that especially in today's market, you will need significant amount of money for the down payment, which is minimum 20% right now. So if you're thinking, for example, to buy $400,000 house, you will need that $80,000 in savings. And for a lot of people, that might be not that easy. Number 2 con is if you own the house, you are responsible for all the repairs and renovations. So if you have some water leak or the heater breaks down or AC, it doesn't really matter what it is, you will have to cover the cost. And if you don't know how to fix the house like me, I'm really not handy at all. That means you will have to hire somebody, and that might be very expensive. Reason number 3 why buying a house might be not for everyone, and it is that it's more difficult to relocate if you own the house as opposed to just renting the apartment, simply because when you're just renting, you can pretty much pack and leave, at least in most situations. However, when you own the house and paying the mortgage and etc., you will have to first sell the house if you don't want to lose any money, and sometimes that's actually not that easy to do, especially in today's market. And the 4th con of owning the house is, especially if you still have the mortgage, and that is that you're obligated to pay this mortgage for pretty much 30 years, or 28 or 25 years if you already paid some of it. However, picture the situation when, let's say, you lose the income, or you have a business and you lose some revenue, and you're not gonna be able to pay the full mortgage for a few months. Then the bank can start the foreclosure procedure, so you can lose the house, and even in some cases the down payment, especially if your house is underwater. Now, if you're renting, of course, same thing can happen, but even if the landlord removes you from the apartment, for example, because you didn't pay the rent or didn't pay in full, you can still pretty quickly find another apartment, but at least you're not gonna lose much money. So look, me and my wife own our house for multiple years now, even though we still pay the mortgage, but I would say this: if you like to change the apartment or the location once in a while, or maybe your job dictates you to do so, because you always have to move from one place to the other, then in this situation probably renting would be better option, since it's kind of less obligation towards the actual property. You don't own it, you don't have to worry about it, it's more flexible. However, if you know you're gonna stay in the same general location for a while, especially for long period of time because you have steady job or even a career that doesn't change the locations, then even though owning the house might be a little bit more expensive for average family, but I think because of what you're getting for it, you have more room and you're pretty much making these payments towards your own future because you're actually paying off your house. And that's why I think for the most families, owning a house would be a better solution, especially in the long term. Okay, so I hope this video gave you some clarification, but make sure to check this video next. There is a lot of good info in it too. And as always, thank you for watching.